One glance, one touch, one forbidden love that burned everything down. The coffee cup trembled in Sarah's hands as she stared at the eviction notice taped to her apartment door. 30 days. After working double shifts at the diner and picking up weekend cleaning jobs, she still couldn't make rent for their cramped two-bedroom in Queens. Behind her, 8-year-old Emma hummed while coloring at the kitchen table, blissfully unaware that their world was crumbling. "Mummy, why are you standing in the doorway?" Emma's voice carried that innocent curiosity that made Sarah's heart ache. How could she explain that despite everything, despite the blisters on her feet from 14-hour shifts, despite skipping meals so Emma could eat, despite selling her grandmother's wedding ring last month, it still wasn't enough? "Just getting some air, sweetheart." Sarah forced brightness into her voice, crumpling the notice and shoving it into her purse. She'd figure something out. She always did. The next morning, Sarah adjusted her black uniform for what felt like the 100th time as she approached the gleaming Manhattan office building. The cleaning company had assigned her to the executive floors. Better pay, they said, but also stricter rules. No talking to the executives, no lingering. Invisible efficiency, that was the goal. The elevator climbed to the 42nd floor, each ding echoing in the empty building. At 5 a.m., the offices of Reynolds Industries were tomb quiet, a stark contrast to the buzzing energy that would fill them in a few hours. Sarah pushed her cart down the marble hallway, her rubber-soled shoes squeaking softly against the polished floor. She was wiping down the mahogany conference table when she heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate, unexpected. Sarah froze. No one was supposed to be here this early. The cleaning crew had explicit instructions about avoiding contact with employees, especially executives. "Don't stop on my account." The voice was deep, tired, carrying a hint of amusement. Sarah turned slowly, her cloth still clutched in her hands, and found herself looking at a man who seemed to own the very air around him. Tall, dark-haired, with the kind of sharp jawline that belonged on magazine covers. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie loose around his neck, and there was something raw in his dark eyes that made him seem more human than the corporate portrait hanging in the lobby suggested. "I'm sorry, mister," Sarah's voice caught. She knew exactly who he was, Daniel Reynolds, the 34-year-old CEO whose face graced the cover of Forbes last month. The man who'd built a tech empire before most people figured out their careers. Just Daniel. He moved to the massive windows overlooking Central Park, his reflection ghost-like against the dawn sky. "You're new." It wasn't a question. Sarah nodded anyway, unsure if she should apologize, explain, or simply disappear. I'm Sarah. This is my first week on the executive floor." "Sarah." He repeated her name like he was testing how it sounded. "Do you always start this early? The building's quieter. I can work faster without." She gestured vaguely, meaning without people like you watching me. Daniel turned from the window and something in his expression shifted. "Without interruptions." Exactly. For a moment they stood in comfortable silence. Sarah should have excused herself, returned to her cleaning, maintained the professional distance that kept her employed. Instead, she found herself studying the shadows under his eyes, the way his shoulders carried invisible weight. "Rough night?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. Daniel's eyebrows rose, clearly not accustomed to personal questions from anyone, let alone the cleaning staff. Sarah immediately regretted her boldness. She couldn't afford to lose this job. "I should get back to work," she said quickly, turning toward her cart. "Wait." His voice was gentler now. "Yeah, it was. Rough night, I mean. Board meeting ran until 2. Sometimes I wonder if I should just sleep here." Sarah paused, cloth in hand. There was something desperately lonely in his admission. "That sounds awful." "It is." Daniel moved closer, and Sarah caught the faint scent of expensive cologne mixed with exhaustion. "What about you? What brings you here at dawn?" The honest answer, desperation, overdue bills, an eviction notice, seemed too raw to share with this polished stranger. "I like the quiet," she said instead. "The city's different at this hour, more honest." "Honest?" Daniel repeated the word thoughtfully. "I like that." Their eyes met across the conference table, and Sarah felt something shift in the air between them. It was dangerous territory. She knew that instinctively. Daniel Reynolds existed in a world of boardrooms and charity galas, while she lived paycheck to paycheck in Queens. The space between them might as well have been an ocean. "I really should finish up," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Of course." Daniel stepped back, sliding his hands into his pockets. "It was nice meeting you, Sarah." She nodded and returned to her work, hyper-aware of his presence as he gathered papers from his desk. When the elevator finally carried him away, Sarah realized she'd been holding her breath. Over the following weeks, their early morning encounters became routine. Daniel always arrived around 5:30, usually looking like he'd slept in his office or not at all. Sarah found herself looking forward to their brief conversations about the weather, the city, sometimes deeper topics that surprised them both. "You have a kid," Daniel observed one morning, noticing the small photo tucked into Sarah's cleaning cart. Emma grinned from the picture, gap-toothed and radiant, wearing her favorite purple dress. "Emma, she's 8. Sarah's voice softened as it always did when talking about her daughter. "She's the best thing I've ever done. She looks like you." Daniel studied the photo with genuine interest. Same smile. Same stubborn streak, according to her teacher. Sarah laughed, then caught herself. She was getting too comfortable, too familiar. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Daniel's expression grew serious. The world needs stubborn people. People who don't give up. There was something in his tone that made Sarah look at him more carefully. Sounds like experience talking. "My mother was stubborn, single mum, worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat after my father left." Daniel's admission hung in the air between them. "She never gave up, even when things looked impossible." Sarah felt her chest tighten. What happened to her? "Cancer. 5 years ago." Daniel's voice was carefully controlled. "She never got to see the company really take off, never got to stop worrying about money. I'm sorry." The words felt inadequate, but Sarah meant them deeply. "She would have liked you." Daniel met her eyes. "You have that same fire, same determination." The conversation stayed with Sarah long after Daniel left for his meetings. She found herself thinking about it during her afternoon shift at the diner, while helping Emma with homework during the long subway rides home. There were layers to Daniel Reynolds that the business magazines never captured, grief and loneliness that money couldn't heal. Their relationship evolved gradually, naturally. Daniel began arriving earlier, sometimes bringing coffee for both of them. Sarah learned that he was more comfortable discussing quarterly reports than personal feelings, that he had a devastating smile he rarely used, and that despite his wealth and success, he seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts about everything from city politics to her dreams for Emma's future. "You're different from what I expected," Sarah told him one morning as they stood by the conference room windows, watching the sun rise over Manhattan. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. More arrogant, I guess. More—" She searched for the right word. "Entitled." "Yeah." Sarah turned to study his profile. "You're not what your reputation suggests." Daniel's laugh was dry. "Most people see what they want to see. The suit, the title, the net worth. It's easier that way." "Easier for who?" "Everyone." Daniel's reflection in the window looked haunted. "Including me sometimes." The morning everything changed started like any other. Sarah was cleaning Daniel's office, humming softly to herself, when she overheard a phone conversation that made her blood run cold. "The experiment is working perfectly," Daniel was saying to someone on the other end. "She has no idea who she really is or why she's here. Just keep monitoring the situation." Sarah's hands stilled on the bookshelf she'd been dusting. Experiment? Who was he talking about? "No, don't worry about complications," Daniel continued, his voice carrying the cold authority she'd never heard directed at her. "She's just the cleaning lady, easily replaceable if things get messy." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. She was an experiment, a project. All those conversations, the coffee, the moments of connection she'd treasured, they were all part of some elaborate game she didn't understand. Sarah finished cleaning mechanically, her mind reeling. When Daniel emerged from his private office 20 minutes later, she could barely look at him. "Good morning," he said warmly, as if nothing had changed. "Morning." Sarah's voice was clipped, professional. She began packing her supplies with sharp, efficient movements. "Sarah, is everything okay?" Daniel's concern sounded genuine, which only made it worse. "Fine, just running late." She didn't trust herself to say more. If she started talking, she might start screaming, and she couldn't afford to lose this job no matter how humiliated she felt. The days that followed were torture. Sarah maintained professional distance, responding to Daniel's questions with polite monosyllables. She could see his confusion growing, but she couldn't bring herself to care. Whatever game he was playing, she refused to be his unwitting participant any longer. "Sarah, please talk to me," Daniel said one morning, stepping directly into her path as she tried to leave his office. "What did I do wrong?" "Nothing." The lie tasted bitter. "We were never friends, Mr. Reynolds. I clean your office, you pay my company. That's the extent of our relationship." Something flickered in Daniel's eyes. Hurt, maybe, or disappointment. "That's not true." "Isn't it?" Sarah met his gaze directly. "I'm just the cleaning lady, easily replaceable, right?" Daniel went very still. "Where did you hear that?" "Does it matter?" Sarah pushed past him toward the door. "I have work to do." But Daniel caught her arm gently, his touch stopping her cold. "It matters to me." "Don't." Sarah pulled away, hating how her skin tingled where he'd touched her. "Whatever this is, whatever experiment or project or entertainment, I'm done." "Experiment?" Daniel's voice was sharp with confusion. "Sarah, what are you talking about?" Before Sarah could respond, the elevator chimed and voices filled the hallway. Daniel's business associates, from the sound of it, arriving for an early meeting. Sarah used the distraction to escape, her heart pounding as she fled to the service elevator. The rest of the week passed in a blur of avoided eye contact and stilted professional interactions. Sarah threw herself into work, picking up extra shifts at the diner, but nothing could quiet the voice in her head that whispered she'd been a fool to think someone like Daniel Reynolds could genuinely care about someone like her. Friday afternoon, Sarah was leaving the diner when a sleek black town car pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down, revealing not Daniel, but an elegant woman in her 60s with silver hair and kind eyes. "Sarah Martinez," the woman asked. "Yes? I'm Margaret Reynolds, Daniel's aunt. Could we talk?" Against her better judgment, Sarah found herself sliding into the back seat of the car. Margaret had the same dark eyes as Daniel, but where his were often guarded, hers sparkled with warmth and mischief. "My nephew is miserable," Margaret said without preamble, as the car pulled into traffic. "He won't tell me why, but I have my suspicions." "I don't know what you want me to say, Mrs. Reynolds. Just Margaret, please. And I want you to listen." Margaret turned to face Sarah fully. 3 months ago, Daniel came to me with an unusual request. He wanted to work early mornings before his regular staff arrived, and he wanted to do it anonymously. No advance notice to building security about his schedule changes. Sarah frowned. Why? He'd been getting death threats. Nothing serious, according to the FBI, but enough to make us all nervous. The board insisted on increased security, which meant Daniel felt more trapped than ever in his own life. Margaret's expression grew soft. He just wanted a few hours where he could be himself without bodyguards or protocols, or people watching his every move. The pieces began clicking into place in Sarah's mind, but she remained silent. Then something unexpected happened, Margaret continued. Daniel started talking about a woman he'd met, someone real, someone who didn't want anything from him. For the first time in years, my nephew seemed genuinely happy. "The phone call," Sarah whispered. "I heard him talking about an experiment." Margaret's eyes widened with understanding. "Oh, honey, you misunderstood." She reached for her purse, pulling out a sleek tablet. "Daniel's been working on a revolutionary employee benefits program. Childcare, healthcare, education assistance. He's been calling it his experiment in corporate responsibility. He's been pilot testing ideas with our cleaning service employees because he wanted to help people in situations similar to what his mother faced." Sarah stared at the tablet screen, reading program details that would have changed her life 3 months ago. Subsidized childcare, healthcare coverage, Emergency financial assistance. The call you overheard was about that program, Margaret explained gently. He was telling the board he'd found the perfect test case, a single mother working multiple jobs, exactly the demographic the program was designed to help. But he said I was easily replaceable. He was talking about his own position, sweetheart. If the board didn't approve the benefits program, Daniel threatened to step down as CEO. He said his role was easily replaceable, but employees like you were the heart of what makes a company worthwhile. The world seemed to tilt around Sarah. Everything she'd believed about that conversation, about Daniel's motivations, had been filtered through her own insecurities and fear. "I've made a terrible mistake," Sarah whispered. "We all have, dear. The question is what you're going to do about it." Saturday morning found Sarah standing outside Daniel's apartment building on the Upper East Side, her courage wavering with each passing minute. The doorman had been skeptical about letting her up, but something in her expression must have convinced him she belonged there. Daniel answered his door in jeans and a Columbia sweatshirt, looking younger and more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Sarah, I owe you an apology." The words rushed out before she could lose her nerve. A huge one. Daniel stepped aside to let her in, and Sarah found herself in a space that was elegant but surprisingly warm. Family photos on the mantel, well-worn books scattered on tables, the faint smell of coffee and something that might have been homemade pancakes. "You don't owe me anything," Daniel said quietly. "Yes, I do." Sarah turned to face him, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "I heard part of a conversation and assumed the worst. I thought you were playing some kind of game with me." "Sarah, let me finish." She took a shaky breath. "I've spent so long expecting people to let me down that I didn't recognize someone who was actually trying to help. Your aunt explained about the benefits program, about why you were working early mornings. I'm sorry I didn't trust you enough to just ask." Daniel moved closer, his expression unreadable. "Why didn't you ask, I mean?" "Because I was scared." The admission cost her, but she forced it out. "Because men like you don't usually notice women like me, and when they do, it's never for the right reasons. Because I couldn't believe that someone successful and kind and genuinely good would want to spend time with me just because... Just because what? Just because of who I am." Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. "Not what I could do for you or give you, but just... me." Daniel closed the distance between them, stopping just close enough that Sarah could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "Sarah, you're the first person in years who's talked to me like I'm human instead of a stock price. You make me laugh. You call me out when I'm being ridiculous. You care about things that matter. Your daughter, your work, making the world slightly better wherever you can. Daniel, I look forward to 5:30 in the morning because that's when I get to see you," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "Not because you're an experiment or a project, but because you're the best part of my day." Sarah felt tears threatening. "I've been such an idiot." "We both have." Daniel reached up to touch her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she didn't realize had fallen. "I should have been honest about the benefits program from the beginning. I should have explained about the security issues, about why I was sneaking around my own building. I was so used to keeping parts of my life compartmentalized that I didn't know how to just be real with someone." "So where does that leave us?" Daniel's answer was to lower his head and kiss her, soft and tentative at first, then deeper when Sarah's arms came up around his neck. It was a kiss that tasted like forgiveness and possibility, like the promise of something neither of them had dared hope for. "It leaves us figuring it out together," he murmured against her lips. "If you want to." "I want to," Sarah whispered. "But Daniel, our lives are so different. Your world, my world. Then we'll build a new one." Daniel pulled back to meet her eyes, his expression serious. "I know it won't be easy. The media, the social expectations, the sheer logistics of our different lives. But Sarah, I'm tired of living in a world where everything is calculated and strategic and safe. You make me want to take risks. Even if those risks include an 8-year-old girl who thinks cereal counts as a vegetable and asks approximately 1,000,000 questions per hour." Daniel's smile was radiant. "Especially then. I'd love to meet her if she's okay with it." She'll probably interrogate you about your intentions. Good. I'll tell her I intend to make her mother happy for as long as she'll let me. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the same conference room where she'd first met Daniel, but everything had changed. The cleaning cart was gone, replaced by a mahogany desk, where she now worked as Director of Employee Relations for Reynolds Industries. Daniel's benefits program had been approved unanimously, and Sarah had been the natural choice to implement it company-wide. Ready? Daniel appeared in the doorway, straightening his tie. As ready as anyone can be for their first board presentation, Sarah replied, smoothing her new navy blue dress, a far cry from her cleaning uniform. But she'd insisted on paying for it herself. You'll be brilliant. Daniel crossed to her, straightening an imaginary wrinkle on her collar, an excuse to touch her, she knew, and she smiled at the familiar gesture. Emma's convinced I'm going to forget how to talk. Emma's 8. What does she know? Daniel's eyes crinkled with amusement. Besides, she's more excited about the aquarium trip tomorrow than she is worried about your presentation. She likes you. I like her too. She's smart, funny, and she has excellent taste in breakfast foods. Daniel glanced toward the boardroom, where voices indicated the meeting was starting. She also has the most amazing mother. Flatterer. Truth-teller. Daniel leaned down to kiss her forehead. Now go show them why this program matters. As Sarah walked into the boardroom, laptop in hand and heart full of purpose, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. A desperate morning with an eviction notice had led to a chance encounter that changed everything. Not because of fate or fairy tale magic, but because two people had chosen to see past surfaces to something real beneath. The presentation went perfectly. The board approved expanded funding for the employee benefits program, which would now serve as a model for other companies across the country. As Sarah fielded questions and saw genuine enthusiasm for initiatives that would help working families, she felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with her own success and everything to do with the difference they could make together. Later that evening, as Daniel helped Emma with her science project, while Sarah cooked dinner in his kitchen, their kitchen now officially as of last week, she marveled at how natural it felt. Emma chattering about photosynthesis, Daniel asking thoughtful questions that made her daughter beam with pride, the scent of homemade marinara sauce filling the air. "Mom, did you know that plants can talk to each other through their roots?" Emma announced, looking up from her poster board. "I did not know that," Sarah replied, catching Daniel's eye and smiling. "It's like they have their own secret network," Emma continued excitedly. "Daniel says companies are kind of like that too, right, Daniel?" "Right. Everyone's connected. And when one part of the system gets stronger, it helps the whole thing grow." Sarah paused in her stirring, struck by the metaphor. A year ago, she'd been isolated, struggling alone, convinced that her problems were hers to solve. Now she was part of something larger, a family, a company, a community of people working to lift each other up. "Earth to Mom," Emma giggled. "You're stirring nothing. The sauce is fine." "Sorry, sweetheart, just thinking." "About what?" Daniel moved to stand behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders. "About networks," Sarah said, leaning back against his chest. "About how the best things happen when people connect in unexpected ways." "Like a CEO and a cleaning lady?" Daniel murmured in her ear. "Like two people who were brave enough to be honest with each other," Sarah corrected, turning in his arms. "Eventually." "Eventually," Daniel agreed, and kissed her while Emma made exaggerated gagging sounds in the background. Later, after Emma was asleep and they sat together on the couch, Sarah reflected on the strange turns life could take. She'd entered that office building desperate and invisible, convinced that people like Daniel Reynolds lived in a different universe from people like her. She'd been right about the different universes, but she'd been wrong about the possibility of building bridges between them, wrong about the assumption that success and kindness couldn't coexist, that wealth automatically meant emotional poverty, that someone who had everything couldn't still be searching for something real. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked, following her gaze toward the windows that offered a glittering view of Manhattan. "First impressions," Sarah said. "How wrong they can be." "Tell me about your first impression of me." Sarah laughed, curling closer to his side. "Intimidating. Untouchable. Probably the kind of person who'd never notice someone like me, except to complain about a missed spot on the conference table. And now? Now I know you're intimidating when you need to be, but you're also the man who spent an hour helping my daughter build a volcano for her science project. You're successful and driven, but you remember what it feels like to struggle. You're generous but not condescending, ambitious but not ruthless. Sarah looked up at him. You're just Daniel. Just Daniel, he repeated thoughtfully. I like that more than CEO or billionaire or any other title. Good, because that's who I fell in love with. The words hung in the air between them, the first time either had spoken of love directly, though it had been evident in 1,000 small moments over the past months. Daniel's arms tightened around her. I love you too, he said simply. You and Emma, and the life we're building together. As they sat together in comfortable silence, Sarah thought about the eviction notice that had started it all, still tucked in her jewelry box as a reminder of how quickly everything could change. That notice had represented her worst fears. Failure, displacement, letting Emma down. Now it served as a symbol of resilience, of the strength that came from facing obstacles head-on instead of running away. The forbidden love from the title that had brought her to his door hadn't burned everything down after all. Instead, it had cleared away the assumptions and fears that kept them isolated, making space for something real and lasting to grow. Sometimes the most dangerous risk was the one that led to exactly what you needed most. A cinematic moment showing Sarah, a young Latina woman in black cleaning uniform, and Daniel, a handsome businessman in an expensive wrinkled suit, standing face-to-face in a luxurious Manhattan conference room at dawn. Golden sunrise light streams through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, casting long shadows across polished marble floors. Their eyes are locked in an intimate gaze filled with vulnerability and connection, despite the obvious class divide. Photorealistic style with warm, soft lighting, creating an atmosphere of forbidden romance and emotional tension in the corporate setting. Prompt. A cinematic moment showing Sarah, a young Latina woman in black cleaning uniform, and Daniel, a handsome businessman in an expensive, wrinkled suit, standing face-to-face in a luxurious Manhattan conference room at dawn. Golden sunrise light streams through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, casting long shadows across polished marble floors. Their eyes are locked in an intimate gaze filled with vulnerability and connection, despite the obvious class divide. Photorealistic style with warm, soft lighting, creating an atmosphere of forbidden romance and emotional tension in the corporate setting. New style. Photorealistic, cinematic lighting, emotional realism, mood, intimate, vulnerable, romantic tension, environment. Luxurious corporate conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows and marble floors overlooking Central Park at sunrise. Characters. Female. Name. Sarah. Ethnicity. Latina. Age. Mid-20s. Attire. Black cleaning uniform. Expression. Soft yet conflicted gaze. Male. Name. Daniel. Ethnicity. Caucasian. Age. Early 30s. Attire. Expensive wrinkled suit. Expression. Intense emotional connection. Lighting. Type. Warm golden sunrise light. Direction. Streaming through windows from behind. Effect. Soft highlights and long shadows. Camera. Angle. Eye level. Shot type. Medium close-up. Focus. On their faces and emotional connection. Depth of field. Shallow blurred background. Composition. Balance. Symmetrical. Framing. Centered on both characters. Foreground. Reflections on marble floor. Background. New York skyline and Central Park at dawn. Size. 1024x1024. Quality. High. Details. Realistic skin tones. Natural light reflections. Subtle emotional tension.